Hello friends, I'm back for another Year in the Bible video, and this time we're taking a look at the book of Job. I feel like Job is one of those, like everybody knows a little bit about Job, but it was really fun for me to go through and kind of do a deep dive. I talked a lot about earlier in this series about, the study days where I kind of picked up a commentary and at the end and read through. I did that a couple times in the middle on Job just because there's a lot going on. I was trying to follow my way through. So either study Bible, commentary, just to kind of learn a little bit more. Okay, so I'll say a couple things up front. I've really gotten into Job is written as poetry. So there's this poetic setting. I'm going to show you a picture of the poetic typeface on my Bible, or the poetic setting in my Bible, and you can see it's not the best. That's like I've kind of found a downfall of this Bible because there's just certain places where there's like one word on a line because of the poetic break, and some Bibles, just the design, the typesetting for poetry is really, really great and makes it really easy to read. This one, it's kind of broken up a lot, and I say that knowing that I'm getting ready after this to dive into Psalms and the Proverbs, into a lot of poetic sections of the Bible, like hundreds of pages, and so I'm going to push through. But it's like, hey, it really matters. This is my plug for the Bible reviewer and me thinking like it really matters to get a Bible that the typesetting is really desirable and that even all the formats of it really work. And it's hard to get a really great one. So, but all overall, my Bible just update is hanging on really well. Job starts on page 428, so I'm over a third of the way through the Bible. And it's holding up really great. The paper is doing well, my pens and my all that stuff. So Job, right? It has this beginning in the NRSV says, there once was a man. It kind of has that once upon a time feel to it, right? And we're taking this land of Uz, and it's kind of stepping outside of this historical timeline that we've been in throughout the Old Testament, and now we're kind of getting out of that, and we're getting this story that we don't really have. It's not really placed in Israel. It's not really placed in the timeline flowing out of Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. It's here right at the beginning of the wisdom literature, and I think that part of it, where it is and what's happening, the historicity of it is not the point of Job. There's some bigger questions being asked. So you get this like little preface where we talk about Job and his character, and then this like courtroom scene with Satan and God, and Satan basically saying, well, the only reason why he's so good is because you've blessed him. Like, take away some of this stuff and let's see what happens. That's fascinating, by the way. And then everything falls apart. I mean, like, everything falls apart for Job. And yet his initial response here in the end of chapter 1, the Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And then this kind of conversation between Job and his friends happens. And it's this back and forth. It kind of follows a pattern where Job says something, they respond, Job responds, the next friend responds. It kind of does this back and forth thing all throughout. And really my takeaway from it is, Job is defending his character and his righteousness, but at the same time questioning God, like saying God can't be just, or God's justice cannot be the thing that is in charge here, because if it were, this would not be happening to him. So it's this really interesting, like I think of Job as like Job as outside perspective, having not read it in a while. Oh, Job's friends were wrong. Job was right. And Job is vindicated at the end and proven right, but also he's lamenting. He's shaking his fist at God a little bit. He's not like 100% right about everything he says, but he's really wrestling with what's God up to. I mean, I think the question is like, why does the big picture question, other than being about God's justice and how the world works, is about why is there human suffering, right? I mean, I don't know about you, but those questions come up in my life all the time. I mentioned in my last video that we had a family funeral, and it was like a tragedy, right? Like someone who died way too young, and it was awful. And why does God allow suffering to happen? And that's the big picture question in Job. And he goes back and forth. His friends are basically saying, well, God is just, so you must have done something. Like this has to be on you. And Job keeps defending himself, and we just go straight through. I mean, it's back and forth. I will admit that in the middle of this, I kind of like, my eyes started like getting blurry. I would get to a point where I'd be like, okay, I got to stop for the day, because I was trying to find key places where I could like take a break in this back and forth argumenting. It was hard, the back and forth argument that was happening, but again, I mean, some of the subtitles, Job reaffirms his innocence. Job prays for relief. Then his friend goes, God is punishing you because you're wicked, you know, those sorts of things. But then the really beautiful thing, I think, happens towards the end of this where, after Job, after everything winds down, then you got this fourth guy, what's his name? Elihu comes in and kind of like offers a third perspective. Like, what if you guys have missed the point about what God's doing? What if it's bigger than that? And then the Lord comes in, and I really feel like what happens, I highlighted, I haven't been using my yellow highlighter a ton, but I highlighted chapter 38, verse 4, the first 3 words. Where were you? I love that. God's like, hey, Job, where were you when the earth's foundations were formed? Where were you? Hey, would you like to be in charge of this? And it's almost as if you're asking all these questions, and God says, you have no idea the perspective that I have on the world. And I think that that's the crazy thing, is that we do not get a clear-cut answer in the book of Job about why there is suffering. What I think we're getting is God saying, you can't see everything that I can see. You can't know. There's a great book by A.W. Tozer that I read as a college student. That was like, I think there's a chapter called, the book is called The Knowledge of the Holy. And like there's this idea in that book, I remember at least, that if you think you can like get to know everything about God, then you haven't, because there's always going to be something that God understands that you don't. There's going to be more of God that you can't wrap your mind around. The more you grow, like it's a lifelong pursuit, but God's bigger than that. And I feel like God's going, hey, like this is, you're not going to be able to make this make sense. Your arguments aren't going to be able to work out perfectly because you are not me. And that, man, there's like this deep humility that comes from reading that. And I mean, obviously Job's life has been like turned upside down. Everything has been taken from him. And his response here is to say, see, this is chapter 40, I am of small account. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand on my mouth. I have spoken once and I will not answer twice, but will proceed no further. Job's like, okay, God, my only response is to keep my mouth shut, right? And Job humbles himself. And we see here at the very, very end that like Job's humility satisfies God, and that his friends are proven to be wrong, and that Job his life is made whole again. But we're not really given this clear-cut answer to why this happened. And we see some of the early, the courtroom scene, and we kind of have a little perspective on that. But the big question of why is there human suffering, and I think that's just it really made me think, about what that is and how that works. And just a reminder for me, I'm looking back now, right? This is a good like slow down moment. What did I learn from Job? I think I learned that it's okay to say, God, what's going on, right? Like Job did that. We're going to see that in the Psalms. I'm about to dive in. There's Psalms of lament where there's like, God, what's going on? I'm crying out. I'm begging for an answer. That's okay. But we're not always going to get an answer. But will we trust? I think that's what this is about. Will we trust that God has it figured out? And that it's all right for us not to have all the answers all the time. That's really hard. If you're going through something really terrible right now, it's hard to hear me say, just trust God. He's got it. But that's part of what faith is. I had this sermon that I preached recently. We're talking about what faith is. It's deep trust in God, formed by humility, that gives us hope. I think that's what the book of Job is about. It's about faith. It's about having hope even in the midst of suffering, having hope even when we can't figure it out, because we have formed a deep trust in God that's formed by humility, recognizing that we don't know everything, but God does. And that takes time. But I believe that my relationship, my story with God is that He's been proven to be trustworthy. And so this is just a really strange, weird, beautiful, messy story that God says, I'm bigger than you, and you're not necessarily going to be able to wrap your mind around all of this, but I'm up to something. And are we willing to accept that, right? Are we willing to trust that? And to, as Joe did, just keep our mouth shut and humble ourselves before God. So it's a lot, but it's a beautiful read. I'm kind of, honestly, right now, fleshing some of this out for the very first time. I took like 3 little lines of notes before I made this video, and I I got a lot more out of it just talking through it. So this is actually, I've said this multiple times, this is a really good process for me to kind of talk through some of this and just, it's a blog, it's a reflection, right? I'm just figuring out what I mean and what I think and what this did for me as I share it with you. So yeah, I would love to know your thoughts on Job. Maybe you've done a Bible study on Job, or you've read Job, or you just got some ideas. So leave those in the comments. Please share those with me. I'd love to hear what you have to say. That's the other cool thing about Job, is that there's a lot of perspectives and nuances here. I think you can get a lot of good stuff. There's a lot here. So maybe something I totally missed, you've got insight on. So please share that with me. And I'm getting ready to dive into Psalms. And so I'm really excited about that. I thought for a moment, because of the poetry thing, I thought about grabbing a different Bible, but I'm going to press in with my Cambridge wide margin. And I thought about doing do 2 Psalms a day or 1 Psalm a day and then move to something else. But I've kind of set this path of reading straight through the Bible. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go from the Psalms. I'm going to see here. My Psalms start on page 459 and end on page 540. So 459 to 540 is like 82 pages. So it's going to take me at least probably 3 weeks. So it might be a little bit of time before my next video. But I'm going to be powering through the Psalms. Maybe I'll give you an update along the way. But also drop in the comments what your favorite Psalm is. So I'll be looking out for those as well. If you have any questions, leave those in the comments. Thank you so much for joining me for this. I'll see you next time.